PLACE, or Plants and Climate Change Education, is a peer learning group convened by the U.S. Botanic Garden. As a peer learning group, we are exploring how botanic gardens and arboreta can maximize the impact of a plant-centered climate change education niche. The photo that you see is a cohort of educators from 6 botanic gardens and arboreta who have been working together over the past 2 years on piloting plant-centered climate change education programs that you're going to hear about today. Here is a map of where we're all located. We come from gardens across the U.S., Hawaii, Oregon, California, Iowa, Florida, and Washington, D.C. So you can see we have great geographic diversity in our group, also diversity in terms of the ways that climate change impacts the places that we live and the people who live around us. Our work as a cohort is dedicated to learning together, creating and testing plant-centered climate change education models, and sharing new understandings, resources, and best practices across the public gardens community. And the sharing is what today is all about. We have been hosting these PLACE conversations as online professional development opportunities for our public gardens education colleagues who are interested in plant-centered climate change education like we are. We've had some great guest expert speakers over the past few years from outside the public gardens community. You can find a playlist of those on the USBG YouTube channel, which we'll share. But today you're going to hear from your peers who have tried out some creative climate change education programs at their gardens. So this is going to be really fun. We hope this is going to be really relevant and inspiring for everyone. To get us started, what I would like to do is welcome Grace Anderson and Raydell Van Fossen to the stage. Grace is representing the U.S. Botanic Garden in Washington, D.C. Raydell is representing the Harold L. Lyon Arboretum in Honolulu, Hawaii. Both Grace and Raydell have led the development of climate change education programming that engaged adult public audiences with plants and climate change through locally focused approaches. So first, we're going to share videos that will give you a snapshot of what they did in their programs, starting with the U.S. Botanic Garden and then followed by Lyon Arboretum. Then after we see both videos, Grace and Raydell will answer a few of your questions about their programs. So let's go ahead and start out in Washington, D.C.
For our Plants and Climate Change Education project, the U.S. Botanic Garden in Washington, D.C. created our Cocktails and Conversations program. This was an evening discussion series designed to bridge science and practice by engaging D.C. area residents with plant-relevant climate change research and its on-the-ground applications in our city. We put together panels of local experts who were working at the intersection of plants and climate change. Each discussion included researchers as well as community organizations doing related on-the-ground work. The program topics included the role of local wetlands in the face of climate change, the connections between DC's urban trees and climate change, and climate resilience in our urban environment. There were a few features of this model that were especially important to us. One was the local focus, offering an opportunity for our audience to make connections to the plant world surrounding them here in Washington, D.C. The second was including both research and practice. Researcher panelists communicated current plant science in an accessible way. Community organizations provided concrete examples of how this research translated to practical climate change solutions in our city. Finally, it was important for us to set a hopeful tone, especially for a topic that can sometimes induce anxiety. This meant highlighting work being done to better understand and address climate change locally and showing how the public can access opportunities to learn more and become involved. We intentionally encouraged connection and inspiration. We invited attendees to explore the conservatory before and after the panel. We worked with local chefs to provide plant-based food and beverages that connected to our program themes. The panel discussion included audience Q&A, and the panelists also stayed after to mingle and talk with attendees. Finally, being in the conservatory at night provided a special opportunity. Attendees were able to enjoy being among our beautiful collections and got to know the U.S. Botanic Garden as a place to expand their appreciation of the plant world. The advice we'd give other gardens looking to adapt the Cocktails and Conversations model is to 1, keep it local so folks can find ways to learn about and support their own city. 2, providing food and special evening access to the garden was a huge draw. 3, logistical challenges grow exponentially. The more people you bring into a program series, the more challenges you must navigate. Keep it simple as you're starting out. 4, dynamic and knowledgeable speakers will generate a fascinating discussion. Pick good people and don't get too hung up on what the ideal panel would look like. 5, bring in collaborators with expertise in event planning to find the best program setup for your garden. Plan to iterate on details like seating, audio-visual systems, and the check-in process. Try a few different approaches and take time to debrief with your team as you figure out what works best for you. Having piloted cocktails and conversations, we think there's value in connecting public garden audiences with local climate change topics through the lens of plants. We hope our model might inspire other gardens to create ways for people to engage with climate change research and practice in their communities.
Aloha, e ola nā mea ulu o Hawaii. Thrive, the Growing Things of Hawaii is the title of Lion Arboretum's Plant and Climate Change Education Project. The project's activities followed the existing education and outreach program and provided opportunities to learn about Hawaii's critically endangered and culturally important plants, the threats to their survival caused by climate change, and what they can do to help through a community class, volunteer event, and several outreach events. Several of the events were collaborations between Lion and other University of Hawaii units. The College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources Urban Garden Center instructors helped to host the Native Plants Gardening class, where they spoke about climate change and the benefits of planting native plants in the garden. Lion sponsored the showing of 2 short documentaries for the Institute of Sustainability's film series. A panel discussion followed, including climate change and its implication for food security in Hawaii. Pines for Plants was the outreach event planned by the Plant Extinction Prevention Program, Lion Arboretum, and hosted by Honolulu Beer Works. The event's goal was to provide information about Hawaii's endangered plants, and a beer specially brewed for the event was launched. The staff from Honolulu Beer Works also participated in a volunteer workday at the Arboretum, helping with the restoration of the native forest site at Lion. Lion participated in other family outreach events, such as during the Honolulu Zoo's Summer Concert Series and the Ohia Love Fest, also held at the zoo. Takeaways from the project include incorporating the events into existing programs, which makes it easier than planning a new program from scratch. Partnering with other organizations was invaluable. Both partners could help with the planning and implementation, and future collaborations were planned. The Pines for Plants outreach event was expected to be the most successful as an outlet to reach the general public about climate change and native plants. Although the event garnered a lot of support, it failed to meet the objective as most attendees were colleagues or friends of PEP and Lion staff, most of whom work in conservation and are knowledgeable about the information. The target audience, those who were not familiar with native plants and the effects of climate change, could be found more at general family outreach events, such as the Zoo Concert Series. Overall, it was a great honor to be selected by the U.S. Botanic Garden for the PLACE program. Lion will continue to educate the public about climate change. It is our kuleana responsibility to malama aina, care for our land. Mahalo for watching.
Thank you so much, Grace and Raydell, for those overviews. We'd love to open up the floor to take a couple questions about these programs in DC and Hawaii. So please feel free to use the chat to ask us some questions if you have them. And I'm going to start out with one. Both of these programs took a local focus, and you were inviting adults to think about the plants around where they live. What did you learn about this idea of locally relevant as a way to capture the interest of your audience? Do you want to start out with that one, Raydell?
Sure. What is kind of surprising is that a lot of the local community don't know what our endemic plants are, because what you see in the background, except for Lion Arboretum, but in the mountainside, it's mostly invasive plants. And so that was one of my goals, is to get the community to understand and to know what the endemic plants are. And there's still a lot of confusion between what's native, what is brought in on purpose, and even like the canoe plants, those aren't necessarily native. or just some of the plants that are here through the garden industry or by accident. Often they have Hawaiian names, so people think they're native. So it was really important to actually get that information out to people and our locals.
Yeah, thank you, Raydell. Grace, how about you? The question was around why take a local focus?
Yeah, absolutely. We found that, the topic of climate change can be really overwhelming, and folks are looking for a place to start. And having our goal was to focus on really things that you can access in your backyard, organizations, researchers, government entities that are really at your fingertips, and to bring DC residents into contact with those folks that are really accessible and folks that are actually like, yes, we want to be in contact with the public. And so kind of bringing those two groups of folks together was really important.
Great, thank you. We've got a question. This will be a good question for everyone. They said it would be beneficial to hear what didn't work as well as you'd like, something about your program, something that you might change or maybe not do next time. Raydell, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so, I thought the Pints for Plants event would be perfect. It was like a Saturday and, folks, for the weekend could come. But we were so nervous about people not showing up that we really got the word out through our networks, and all of them like beer. And so they all showed up, but the venue is really small. So what ended up happening, we filled the venue with our friends and colleagues. And so, they already know what's going on with the plants. They already know the plants, and they know what's happening with climate change. So it was really preaching to the choir. I think maybe we wouldn't invite them the next time. Just do a, social media blast, and focus more on general family outreach events and not specific for climate change or conservation, because that's the target audience, the ones that don't know anything, or they don't even think about it. So I think that's what I would do different next time.
Thank you. How about you, Grace? And I know in the case of the U.S. Botanic Garden, we had multiple programs of this series, and so we change things every time too. So do you want to speak a little bit about some of the things that came up and what your reflections on that are?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had 3 programs, and as Emily said, they were iterations as we sort of moved along and evolved. The event planning aspect of our programming was really huge. And so bringing that, when we first got started, we were like, oh, I think we can kind of throw this together with, spit and a wish and a lot of manpower. And then as we escalated, we realized, bringing in professionals and consulting with professionals really was going to bring our program to the next level. And that our audience, because there's so many events in DC, there's the Smithsonian's, there's this, that, and the next thing, folks have a certain level of expectation. And so we really wanted to meet that. So then the focus for them wouldn't be on, I couldn't hear the AV was this, that, or the next thing. The focus could be on the content. So being able to meet the expectations of what this event is going to be like, so then the audience can focus on the panelists and what they're bringing to the table was important for us. And I think sort of along that same line, looking into the future, maybe having more focused conversations one-on-one or one-on-two. Some of our panels were pretty big, and it was hard, I think, to bop around and really get in deep with what everyone was working on. And so looking to the future, we're thinking about having those focused one-on-one panel conversations.
Great, thank you both. And there was a comment here in the chat about that specialty brew, Raydell, that was part of one of your programs. Do you want to speak about like how that came about and what that collaboration looked like for the Arboretum and the brewery?
So what happened was a few months before, Honolulu Beer Works had hosted a similar event with the snail extinction prevention program. So there's a lot of things in Hawaii that are on the brink of extinction, unfortunately. And so our native snails are one of them. And that one was really popular. And so I had reached out to Honolulu Beer Works to see if they would be interested in doing something for the plants. And what was nice was that the plant extinction prevention program, that's like the sister program to the snail extinction prevention program, had already reached out. So they connected us. We already knew each other, but we didn't know we both reached out. And so they were totally happy to partner. And, the timeline worked out really great. And, it was a nice collaboration because we're both, doing the same kind of work. And like I said, throughout both our, organizations, colleagues and networks, that's how we got the venue to fill up. And but then the Beerworks guys, but one thing, they knew nothing. Their staff knew nothing about plants or conservation. And so when we did the work day at the Arboretum in the restoration site, they actually learned a lot. So I got that group from that event as a, success, I would say.
Thank you. And you mentioned sort of that audience question, and I wanted to ask the same thing of Grace. Do you have a sense of like the audience that your program drew, and how maybe in the future you might do communication about this program?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting because I think this program kind of spoke to our programming at the USBG sort of on a broader level of who do we bring in and who do we want to bring in, or who are we not reaching yet. And so this brought in a lot of folks who were already kind of plugged in and connected to climate change, local events that were happening in DC, folks who would show up to a sort of night at the museum, professors and pubs kind of a event. And so in our minds, these are people who were interested in climate change, maybe science savvy, and they were kind of looking for that bridge into the next actionable item that they could do, or something that they could learn, or someone they could get connected with. Looking towards the future, I would really like to connect more like with the communities that our community engagement specialist is working with in DC, and really think about how do folks who maybe aren't as plugged in to the event scene in DC, how do they get to hear about climate change, especially because a lot of the work that's being done around climate change in DC is impacting communities like in Ward 7 and 8. And so we're thinking that we didn't get to see as many of those folks attend our programs. And so how do we reach that audience? So that's definitely a question for us moving forward.
Great. Thank you both so much. We are going to have a chance to hear a little bit more from you both at the end. But at this time, we are going to say hello to Sarah, Rachel, and Emily. And we will hear from Raydell and Grace in a little while. So Sarah is representing Ryman Gardens at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. Rachel and Emily are representing UC Davis Public Garden and Arboretum in California. Sarah, Rachel, and Emily were all involved in programs that engaged their university communities in communicating with the public about plants and climate change. So we are going to start out again with their program videos, first taking us to Iowa and then to California. And then we will have time again for a few questions about the program. So let's go ahead and start out with Sarah's.
Ryman Gardens Science Communication Fellowship is a training program for scientists based on a framework called Portal to the Public, which involves relationship building, professional development, and face-to-face conversations. Essentially, we teach scientists to connect to public audiences through inquiry, curiosity, and hands-on activities that tie to their research.
My name is Ambar Melendez Perez. I am an Iowa State graduate student. I think I've discovered how much I actually love to do this, to do outreach and to work with kids specifically. It's it really pumped me up to try to find other opportunities. And I think it's helped me become a better communicator, not only at the school, but even in my teaching, as a graduate student, you have to teach. And I found myself becoming a better teacher because of the fundamentals that I've learned here.
Our training program involves 4 on-site workshops that focus on communication strategies, creating memorable learning experiences, hands-on activity development, and responsive facilitation. We meet with scientists one-on-one to provide mentoring support, and our participants work on lesson plans. They hear from others engaging in science communication work, and they also practice talking with folks who aren't familiar with their work to get practice on how to adjust their language.
So one thing that I found really interesting with being a part of this program is that I wasn't entirely sure how to communicate to the broader public. I've communicated at a lot of scientific conferences and things like that, but I've never actually taken the time to communicate to the public. So learning some of those skills about how to communicate with people who don't have the technical knowledge that I have, that don't know the jargon that I use, that sort of thing has been very valuable.
One of the things that we focus on are connecting with local scientists. So for us here at Iowa State University, we focus on reaching out to graduate students, postdoc students, and faculty that may be working in scientific fields. And through the Plants and Climate Change education format, we're really focusing on those scientists who are working in fields that are related to those topics. Another feature is that it's important for us to have the programming on site here at the Gardens. It's really important for us to tie this to the place. The Portal to the Public programming, the format and the structure is accessible to anybody who wants to use it. The implementation manual is a very low cost, but also we're happy to provide those resources for public gardens so that you can make this happen at your space.
For our Plants and Climate Change Education project, the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden created the Climate Ready Gardening Program. Our target audience included college students, volunteers, and community members. To expand our community's climate literacy and empower gardeners to take action in their own backyards, we created 3 program components: outreach training, an online gardening toolkit, and public programs. For the 8-week outreach training, we paired Habitat Horticulture Learning by Leading student interns with master gardeners interested in pollinator education. Both groups brought unique strengths and complementary energy as we prepared them to host outreach tables at local events for diverse audiences. To do this, we partnered with campus specialists who presented on topics including climate science, local biodiversity, and garden design. They then practiced prompts at simulated outreach scenarios and participated in a final communications training. They piloted new climate-ready educational materials and plant lists at a variety of public outreach events, like our Arboretum plant sales, our campus-wide Biodiversity Museum Day, and the local California Honey Festival. This team united generations and shared perspectives that benefited both groups while enhancing our messaging to the community. The online Climate Ready Gardening Toolkit shares regional gardening resources to help local gardeners adapt their gardens for the future climate. Our vision is to make this a one-stop shop that includes recommended plant lists, sample planting plans, and case studies like our Life After Lawn blog series. Our public program series took place over 3 consecutive Tuesday evenings in the spring. For the pilot year, we offered these workshops to our volunteer and donor community. Each workshop included an interactive talk and tour where we introduced the Climate Ready program and toolkit on week 1, garden design on week 2, and irrigation design and maintenance on week 3. While we aspire to help gardeners understand how climate change affects their gardens, local wildlife, and the environment, we also want to share hopeful, actionable ways people can use plants and gardens to create havens for biodiversity for the enjoyment of all. The advice we'd give other gardens looking to adapt the climate-ready gardening program model is to build off the strengths of your organization, programs, and resources that you've already developed. Work with your local USDA Climate Hub to conduct a climate assessment for your garden and adapt this model to your region. Explore integrating different age and demographic groups in training and outreach implementation. And develop a program that is accessible to new gardeners and refreshing to expert gardeners. Practical horticulture is a natural entry point for public gardens to enter the climate change conversation with their communities. Public gardens have a unique and valuable role to play in showing gardeners how each of us can make a difference in supporting biodiversity and increasing resilience in our neighborhoods. Together, we can transform urban landscapes for the well-being of our communities and the future of our planet.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah, Emily, and Rachel for those great overviews. We're going to, again, open the floor for questions about these two programs. And there was one question around the resources that you mentioned or that your teams have available to share with other gardens. And so one question was specifically, Sarah, about the implementation manual that you use. Can you speak about that and where people can find it?
Absolutely. So since we use an existing program, it's called Portal to the Public, and it's managed by the Institute for Learning Innovation. The implementation manual itself, like the complete manual, I think is $149, and it includes strategies to build a program at your own organization, the framework and tools for building sustainability and institutional buy-in into the program that you're going to do at your organization, as well as case studies and research and just a whole bunch of the kind of support for the program, and then an entire catalog of professional development elements that touch on various different types of learning. So learning through inquiry, there's reflection, so different categories of elements that you can basically kind of plug and play. You can kind of pick and choose which of the elements work for you, and then it tells you step by step how to lead them, what materials you need, and then the resources that you provide to your scientists that you're working with to help them get the most out of the program as well. So I can't talk enough about how amazing the program is. You do have to align it to your organization, and there are 2 public gardens in the network. It's mostly science centers, discovery centers, zoos, nature centers, all kinds of, if I already said that. But there are 2 public gardens, Ryman Gardens and Phipps Conservatory in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we are both ready and willing to help come and help you figure out how to make a program at your garden. But really, I can also provide our scientist notebook, which has the worksheets and all that stuff that our scientists used, and they're really things that you probably already know how to do as environmental educators or botanical garden educators. We really emphasize that as informal learning experts, you already know how to do this. It's just kind of pulling on those skills that you already have to do that. So I'm going to end it there, but I'm happy to talk more to anyone who's interested at all. And thank you for sharing in the chat. There's the link to the Portal to the Public.
Great, thank you. And then Rachel, do you want to speak a little bit about the Climate Ready Gardening Toolkit?
Yeah, so that was one of our 3 projects that we focused on this year. And really, it initially was reorganizing our sustainable gardening toolkit to really make sure there's a climate focus and really follows our themes within the Climate Ready Gardening project of looking at water, at biodiversity, at our trees, and also including health and well-being. So we kind of we updated it a little bit, but also it's now in a format where we can add more resources and also start getting feedback from our community on what else do you need? What is the most helpful thing for you? So it's still kind of in the process of being made, and we want to make it a dynamic toolkit. So it'll have changes and updates regularly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We had a question about you're working with students, and Sarah, someone specifically asked about the work with graduate students. Were they all doing botany research? Were they climate change researchers? Sort of what domains did they come from? And do you think it matters?
Yeah, so honestly, I don't think it matters. I'll start with that. But I'll say for the place years, so for 2023 and 2024, we did focus on, so we normally we open our science communication training program to any scientist, and those are grad students, postdocs, faculty, or even industry scientists if they're working at a biotech company or all the other things. And we've worked with folks that have an incredible range of scientific backgrounds, people who are engineers, folks who are working in physics, like, elementary physics and like all these kinds of things. For the place project for the 2 years, we did focus on, we narrowed that down to folks who were working in fields that are related to plants and climate change. And it's really the only qualifier that we gave them. We listed some examples, but we had scientists working in agronomy, folks working in material science. So someone who's actually working on finding new alternative ways to make batteries from glass and other natural materials. So not plant related. And, folks who are working, there are plenty of people who are working in areas that you can connect to climate change. Unfortunately, because it's so prevalent, the connections that we make to that, and so we ask people to kind of narrow it down. But then we're like, let's just find ways that we can connect plants, that we can connect what we do at a public garden, and tie that all in to the work that you're doing and the research that you're doing. And people actually found it really helpful to think about it a little bit more broadly. I hope is that helpful? But in circumstances, and even if as we continue to do this training program, we'll open it up to anybody working in science. I think we're going to keep the climate change training that we provided, that actually came from one of the or a number of the place webinars that we've done over the course of the 2 years. Some of that was helpful professional development for me as an educator that doesn't have a background in plants or science, who just has a passion for it. And so it was really helpful for me to find resources where I could say, here's what's happening in the plant world, in the phenological world, with wildlife, with all these different changes. And that's the perspective that we're coming from a botanical garden. We're going to continue training our scientists from that perspective, and including ways for them to talk about climate change, which is a hot button issue. We have several strategies that we provide for them to talk about tough conversations. But I'll let I'll kind of come back to the group for a second. If people want to hear more about that, I'm happy to share.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And there was a quick question, maybe Emily, you want to address this one about the domains that the university students that you work with were coming from. Were they in the sciences and horticulture? Are you connecting with other disciplines other than sort of the ones we might think of first?
Yeah, so the Habitat Horticulture internship was part of our larger Learning by Leading program. And with that program, all of the various strands focus in some way on the environment and leadership. So the Habitat Horticulture one was very focused on climate ready gardening this year, but I lead a team that focuses on urban tree stewardship, and we have waterway stewardship. We have folks doing more environmental education work, all kinds of projects. And we do find that the majority of our students have majors that relate in some way to the environment, but we do not restrict the internship to that. So, for example, I had a tree student who was actually, I think he was a double major in sociology and Chicano studies. anyway, we do get students from a range of disciplines. And the other thing is that through some of our outreach events, they do pull from the broader UC Davis community. So like my team, we do volunteer tree planting events, and most of the volunteers are students from campus, but they can be from any different realm. Like we've had law students and just all kinds of folks come to those events. And similarly with like Biodiversity Museum Day, that is a campus event and draws from a much broader community of the campus community and the regional community. The other thing I'll just say about this program, just relating to a comment that I'm seeing from Ray, is that we do have a Learning by Leading community of practice with other public gardens across the US. There's a Canadian member, someone from a group from Brazil. So it is a model that we have developed and shared, and would be happy to continue to grow that network if there are folks out there who would like to learn more about it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Emily, Rachel, and Sarah. Great to hear about your work. We're going to hear a little bit more from you later, but now we are going to transition over to our final two presenters. So we'll say goodbye to Sarah, Rachel, and Emily, and hello to Nina Avila and Britt Patterson-Weber. Nina is representing Hoyt Arboretum in Portland, and Britt is representing Naples Botanical Garden in Naples, Florida. Both Nina and Britt have developed plant-centered climate change education programs that engage middle school students. So first we're going to travel to the Pacific Northwest with Nina, and then across the country to Florida and see Britt's video.
Have you ever talked to a plant or listened to a tree? This is a question that educators from Hoyt Arboretum Friends in Portland, Oregon asked 7th graders participating in a climate change pilot program. Students were encouraged to stretch their thinking and become curious about their connection with the more than human world. To help bridge the connection, we introduced them to all aspects of the western red cedar, a native Pacific Northwest tree. The program plan allowed for fall and spring classroom visits, followed by fall and spring field trips to the Arboretum. During each lesson, students were introduced to the words of Robin Wall Kimmerer and her inspirational book, Braiding Sweetgrass, where she reminds us that plants are teachers. Each lesson also included handmade nature journals and writing prompts inspired by the work of Joanna Macy. And each lesson used the western red cedar to tell the story of tree biology in a changing climate. The Western Red Cedar Dieback Community Science Project helped to culminate all of the learning into active participation in the climate crisis. We were lucky to have a special guest, Dan DeSiglio, who connected students with trees using their sense of hearing.
The way that I listen to trees and allow students to listen to trees is by using an industrial vibration sensor. By listening to the body of a tree, I am able to detect vibrations and moreover, or more precisely, access a domain of expressivity, also known as what I think of as the voice of the tree, and to make that audible to people.
If you're an educator looking to engage middle school students with plants and climate change conversations, here are some suggestions. Get teachers involved early. Their support makes a big difference. Make material relevant by incorporating ways for students to share about themselves. Practice observation. Looking closely and taking notice is a skill. Fund substitute teachers and transportation. This support is what made it possible for schools to bring students outside. And lastly, get creative. Science and social-emotional learning can successfully be taught together. The intention is that students engaged with this curriculum will reflect on their relationship with nature now and into future years of decision-making. Isn't this the purpose of education? To learn the nature of your own gifts and how to use them for good in the world?
Dedicated researchers adventuring for greener outdoors now. That's the Dragon Squad, a program for 6th and 7th graders led by Naples Botanical Garden.
Isn't that a beauty?
Working with Immokalee Community Academy, this program started with a one-week summer intensive that transitioned to a weekly after-school program. Students learned about plants and climate change through hands-on projects, games, and field trips. Immokalee is a low-transportation agricultural community, so getting students off campus to visit local natural wonders helped foster connections with the environment. During these trips, we introduced students to the diversity of plants in Southwest Florida, as well as our regional climate change threats and solutions. Back on the school campus, students revived their school garden, creating an on-site plant lab for the whole school. In the spring, a unit on crop wild relatives connected the dots between their school garden, agriculture, wild plants, and climate change, and the Dragon Squad embarked on their own project with native relatives of tomatillo, arugula, and more. Students propagated these species at school before outplanting seedlings at a museum in their community. We've learned a lot about meaningful engagement with middle school students through this project. Here are 4 tips we have for other gardens looking to develop similar programming. First, prioritize fun. A challenge of this pilot was developing fun plant-centered climate change curriculum. Our program was outside of school. This pilot was developing fun plant-centered climate change curriculum. Our program was outside of school hours, so lectures and worksheets were not well received. We didn't lose anything with this gamified approach. If anything, prioritizing fun elicited positive emotions and made concepts sticky. Secondly, localize the content. Students had an easy time naming faraway ecosystems they've read about in textbooks, but they had a more difficult time naming local ecosystems. Taking students into wild Florida encouraged their concern for those very habitats. Third, don't overlook the basics and prepare to repeat content. It was necessary for us to review the basics of plant science and climate change several times throughout the year. Each time we did, we packaged the content with a different delivery method. You just never know what is going to break through and create that aha moment. Finally, staff the program appropriately. Let's face it, middle school isn't easy for anyone. Staff leading programs for this age group must be flexible, self-assured, and ready to bring their authentic self to the group. We had to earn the students' trust. Then and only then would they be ready to be active participants. We can teach all sorts of people about plants and climate change. So why focus on middle schoolers? For one, there aren't many enrichment opportunities for this age group. For us, they were also an audience we were not yet serving. But they are the climate generation. This age group is growing up in a world that is perceptibly shaped by climate change, happening in their literal backyards and in their own lifetimes. When we talk about climate mitigation in the future, we adults need to consider the perspectives of the people who will be living it. Our students already understand their role. Just listen to this Dragon Squad member.
It is important for middle schoolers to learn about climate change in their community because they could be one of those future scientists that allows us to help find new ways to help preserve our earth and keep it healthy so that nothing goes to waste.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nina and Britt, for those great videos sharing the work with middle school students. If people have questions for Britt and Nina, please go ahead and share those in the chat. I'm going to start out with one. With the middle school students that you worked with, what kinds of climate change ideas did you find that they had when they entered your programs? Do you have a sense of kind of what they already knew about it or how they felt from either prior climate change education experiences that they'd had or just from kind of being in the world and hearing about it? Shall we start with you, Britt, on that one?
Sure, I can start. The students definitely had a sense of climate change. I mean, they've got phones in their pockets all the time, so it's a concept they're aware of. I don't think their knowledge went very deep, so they know that it means hot and it is bad. And there might be a couple of other things given our location. I would bet that most of our students know the words rapid intensification when we're talking about storms because we were devastated by one about 1.5 years ago. But beyond that, knowledge didn't run very deep, which then gave us a lot of opportunity to develop our curriculum in a way that would expose them to other effects, but then also the mitigation and the adaptation, which is something that they didn't have any familiarity with. So that baseline knowledge did help drive where our curriculum went.
Thank you. How about you, Nina? What did you find that students had already heard or already knew about climate change?
Yeah, similar to Britt, just kind of echoing that same, finding that they know it's happening. It's here for us. It's very obvious in our climate, not so much the storms, but the lack of moisture and the long periods of drought. So they know that it's hotter and it's drier. But yeah, in relation to plants, there was no connection. So that was an opportunity for us to kind of help them understand, well, this is what we're feeling and seeing and happening. And this is also happening to plants. And this is what's happening inside of a tree. And this is the biology that's happening and what's causing some of the symptoms that we're seeing in our trees. So yeah, I think doing this again next year too, I would like to dive a little deeper into the science behind climate change. I kind of thought they would be coming with more of that background, but they had awareness. But I think there's opportunity to do more science around it.
Yeah, thank you. And a good segue into another question that's here in the chat. You sort of mentioned something that you'll change for the future, but do you have thoughts about something that didn't go quite as you expected that you might want to adapt? I think you're both planning to continue these programs. Something that you might change for next time.
Yeah, I think when we started planning the program, I said this to the lead educator, M. Kless, who's actually on the call right now, who's in the audience. And I'd like M to pipe in too in the chat with anything to flesh this out. But I'm really glad that we didn't fully flesh out this program before we actually did it. Because I think we were really idealistic going into it, thinking, oh, we can have discussions and the students can plan projects and be really independent, and not really appreciating how middle schoolers are this bundle of conflicting impulses. They're little kids and they're young adults all at the same time. And I'm glad we didn't really create a robust plan, because we realized very rapidly how much we had to change it. Even our students, the same group of students basically for the whole year, were different humans in a summer program versus an after school program. They just had very, very different needs, even though they were the same people. And so I think going into, and we are doing the program, actually we start again on Monday with our next Dragon Squad group. And we've learned a lot from the students this year about what they can't do, and also what their basic needs are. And so we've already adapted our program to meet the things, to remove the things that didn't work quite so well this year.
Thanks, Britt. And that's so great to know that there's a new group that's going to be starting really soon. That's awesome. How about you, Nina? Anything that comes to mind in terms of, if you did this again, something you might do a little differently?
Yeah, there's so many things I would do differently. And thinking what Britt was just saying too, we noticed, because our model was a classroom visit and a field trip in the fall, and then we repeated a classroom visit and a field trip in the spring. And just the difference in the students between those two seasons and their maturity level and their involvement in the program, we saw a big difference too. So I think recognizing that in this next school year, and starting a little slower, maybe simplify things in the beginning, just knowing where they're at coming in, from sixth grade. We were working mainly with seventh graders. So coming in the fall and kind of meeting them where they're at that time. And then I think the other big piece of it is teacher involvement. I felt like I was a little last minute in getting everything together for this first pilot. And it'll be great this next year. I'll be working with a lot of similar teachers, but thinking about the future and the opportunity for teacher training, teacher involvement, teacher buy-in. They're the ones that have the strong relationships with the students. And we thought by having 4 visits with students that we would be building stronger relationships. But we need more time than that. And it's the teachers that have that connection. So if we can help the teachers and get their buy-in and support, I think that's going to help us in the long run too.
Thank you both. Britt, there's a question about the school garden and how that happened, how you went about creating that, and what's going on with the maintenance and upkeep now with the school.
Sure. So Naples Botanical Garden already has a school garden support network that's been around since about 2011, 2012. And actually at one point, the school that we worked with for Dragon Squad was part of that network. But during 2020, everything changed. They lost the teacher who had been managing the program. And so their garden just sat there for 4 years. And you may have seen in the video that they had planted some bananas there. And when we started the program, the bananas had grown just so dense and so thick that they were blocking out all the sun from the garden. And so initially, when we started working with the students, they expressed very early on that they wanted to bring back the garden. The kids that had been around when they were in early elementary and had used the garden, they wanted it back again. And so we just kind of set about cleaning it up. And that was I was very surprised by how much the students enjoyed the very hard labor of removing bananas in the summertime in Florida. And so we advised the school, just based on our past experience working with school gardens, that raised beds, permanent in-ground things were not right for them. And we really steered them toward using earth boxes, which we have an earth box lending library at the Botanical Garden. And so that makes it much, much easier for the school to manage. But then we also build in some garden time for the student during the Dragon Squad meetings for the students to work on their individual projects.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have everyone back. Thank you, Britt and Nina, for those questions and answers and for your great videos. And we've brought everyone back on just to say, I shared at the beginning that this presentation really is a culmination of a lot of exciting work our gardens have been doing together over the past couple of years. So it's been wonderful to see how these programs which 2 years ago were ideas, were really able to come to fruition.